Hey, what's going on, everybody? I hope you're sitting comfortably because today we are discussing your hair transplant eligibility and we are checking how good of a prospect for a hair transplant you actually are. And number two, when should you get a hair transplant? Are you ready? My name is Matt. I have done 3 hair transplantations and 1 correction, and I've been helping out guys since 2017 with my videos and with my one-on-one help on how to find the right hair transplant clinic, maximize their hair transplant success, and also telling the truth about how to really regrow hair. And before we start, if you could like this video right now, it will help this channel a lot, since it took me about 3 weeks to structure, film, and edit this final video clip for you guys, and I really hope you will enjoy watching this one, so let's start. The best result one can achieve after a hair transplant is going to be relative to his level of hair transplant suitability. Let me explain. And we can see it beautifully on these 3 examples. Out of these 3 guys, one is a great hair transplant candidate, one is average, and one is poor. Stop this video right now and comment below. Which one do you think is average, which one do you think is great, and which one do you think was poor? Now, let's see if you guessed it correctly. Joe Rogan, poor candidate. He did a hair transplant too young, didn't take finasteride. That's a mistake. You cannot do this because then the hair transplant won't be lasting. Also, his donor reserves shrunk a lot over time. He probably didn't anticipate that he will turn into an Norwood 6, maybe almost 7. He didn't plan it properly. Wayne Rooney, average candidate. He got a hair transplant in his mid-20s, as many people nowadays. And although his donor is still looking better than Rogan's, so he will probably not turn into that aggressive Norwood 6, 7, he's gonna be able to hold on to his hair in his 40s, 50s, and still he's looking quite okay. If you look at him today, there's a little bit of thinning on the back, but he's holding on to that hair. And with fibers, as you can see on this image, this is actually the same day. On the left, he's using fibers, on the right, he's not. So we can see how he can still camouflage it fairly well, but still he could have done much better had he planned it properly, had he chosen a better clinic, had he used finasteride in the past, and overall his donor reserves are also not as strong as somebody like James Franco, who is the great candidate that I used for this example. Now, he's somebody who ticks all of the boxes for being the best hair transplant candidate based on my 5 hair transplant qualification indicators I'm going to be presenting to you in this video. You will exactly understand where you stand, whether this life-changing procedure is even for you, whether you should wait, or you can go ahead and do it tomorrow. So, what are the 5 suitability indicators? Number 1, donor hair density per square centimeter. Number 2, usable donor skin surface. I will explain. Number 3, hair shaft characteristics. Number 4, hair per graft average. And number 5, ATPN. And especially the last point is something that is very lacking during hair transplant consultations, in my opinion. And doctors go rarely as in-depth onto that 5th point here. So we'll talk about it in this video so you can assess yourself also with help of this video at home so you know where you stand. Number 1, donor hair density per square centimeter. Based on studies, the average number of hair follicles or grafts that you have in the back and sides of your head, it's around 78 grafts. And this 78 grafts per centimeter square equates to about 141.5 hairs per centimeter square, because each graft or follicle produces more hairs. That should be clear to you. They have been done more studies by Limmer, Haber, Bernstein, Jimenez, Cole, and Deverois that came onto a slightly different range, from 120, let's say, to 200, almost 300 hairs. But I chose this study because it included several hundreds of Indian patients. That's why I decided to go with this one and choose it as the average for our calculations. Donor hair density per square centimeter, the higher, the better. If it's average, it's probably going to be around 70-ish. If it's below average, it's going to be probably even below 65 follicle. You can check it with a doctor, with a dermatologist. They can either use trichoscope, they can use dermoscope and calculate the density on different areas. Now, the second criteria or second indicator for your suitability for a hair transplant would be the donor surface. On average, calculated on based on this study from Dr. Cole and Deverois, shows a patient who looks like a Norwood 6 with a surface that can be usable for FUE that is 203 square centimeters, okay? Of course, the bigger this surface is, the better again. So the higher your parietal regions go up and they're looking strong and they accommodate very thick looking and dense looking follicles, that's great. And the same on the back. For some people, it's very narrow in here and it's very narrow in here. And the skull may be even broad. Example, as you can see, the guy on the left, he has a very broad skull. The other guy on the right is a narrow skull. Plus, the parietal regions go all the way up. And that makes it way more easier to restore this fully, densely, and still have some, follicles in the tank in case this guy recedes further. But the guy on the left, they need to choose a more complex and more thorough approach how to restore this successfully, because the surface is much bigger and the reserves are more narrow on the sides and back. To give you an illustration, how many follicles could you have if you are an average candidate? Because this is average, what we are looking here. We're looking at an average donor zone capacity in total, and we are taking the 203 square centimeters and multiply by 78 follicles or grafts per square centimeter by an average candidate. I just want to share with you how many grafts in total are available if the doctor were to extract everything from the sides and back and put it on top. That would equate to 15,834 grafts. Of course, we cannot take the whole number because then it would be totally empty. So what doctors do, they have like a percentage reduction. They usually work with, maybe 20% or less for the first session. If you need a lot of grafts, they usually go all the way to 30-ish. As you can see here, if you extract 25%, that would be almost 4,000 grafts. And with the average candidate, you can already kind of be on the verge of slight over-harvesting. If you go to 35%, 5,500 grafts, it will already look over-harvested on some areas if you are this average candidate with this surface and this densities of follicles per square centimeter. If you go to 50%, you can of course get 8,000 grafts. And I see many clinics telling patients, yeah, you have 8,000 in your donor, you have maybe 9,000. Yes, if you take 50 or 60% of the donor, then you have those numbers. But be aware that if you were to do this, you will end up with a lot of patches here. And if they don't know how to homogenize that extraction of those 8,000 properly, it will look very, very ugly. So what are the possible problems if the donor hair density will be not estimated properly, or it will be overestimated? Well, it means that if they do this, they will probably take too many grafts or follicular units per centimeter square of the donor area, and it will have the negative consequence, which is permanent overharvesting. It's something you cannot return. You need maybe new hair from other areas and plant it back so you can camouflage it. You can do scalp micropigmentation, but it's not going to be an easy fix. It will require many sessions and paying a lot of money. So most of you guys watching this video who are average candidates, you will cap your donor between 4,000 to 5,500-ish. You will end up there with the FUE, of course. And if you go more, you will need to do some tweaks and touch-ups with the pigmentation, masking, repairs, and so on. If you go more than 35%, it may look ugly. All right. Now, so possible problems, as you can see here, most of the time they overestimate the donor area surface in square centimeter, and they will start extracting hair from the non-safe zones that are higher up and they are lower there. If you take that hair from those areas, they will become unsafe in the future, meaning such grafts could thin out, fall out, and they are not having the DHT resistance, unlike the hair in the center of the donor in the green zone, as you can see here, or close to that green zone. So oftentimes what happens that the clinics will give you those estimates of very high reserves because they assume that they will take a lot of hair from the unsafe zones as well. Negative consequence would be that the transplanted hair will turn out as being less permanent, and such hair can thin out or miniaturize over time. And there is also a risk of complete loss of such hair over time. So if you don't take finasteride, if you don't take any treatments, that this could happen. Number 3, hair type, thickness, and skin to hair contrast. I packed it into one indicator because it's all about just your hair texture, hair type, and the skin-hair relationship. So this indicator, as far as your hair type, thickness, and skin-to-hair contrast, will decide how great your hair transplant can look like after one session. Guys with super thick hair, curlier hair, they get amazing results just after one session. Whereas guys with finer hair, they need multiple sessions to achieve the same fullness. It's the donor zone that will determine how great you can make your hair transplant look in the long run. Why? Because if you keep losing more hair, you can always take more from the donor. So the better your donor is, the longer you will be able to keep restoring in case you lose more. So let's start with hair thickness and why it's good to have thicker hair for a hair transplant. If you look at the bottom right, you can see the thickest hair. It's the coarse hair where there is no miniaturization. Now, if we move up, into the first row, you can see highest hair miniaturization. So if the thick hair starts miniaturizing, it can also look very fine. So we want to make sure that the hair used for the hair transplant is the thickest, with no miniaturization. So let's just look at the bottom row here, where we can see fine hair on the left, medium thick hair in the middle, and coarse hair on the right. So of course, if you have coarse hair, the doctor can use a specific density, let's say 40 to 50, and this 40 to 50 density will look much fuller if we do the same density on the patient with fine hair. The patient with fine hair can get also 40 to 50, but it will not look as full and thick because the see-through effect will be higher since the hair shaft doesn't have the same thickness. And we can see it on patients with fine hair when the candidate's hair transplant ended up looking very natural, but the see-through effect is higher despite them using quite good density on the first try, which was around 40. We can see the guy with the wavy, fuller, thicker hair. You have this hair type, and then the hair transplant will look amazing. And if you don't, then you need more attempts to touch it up to make it fuller with fine hair, or if you're somewhere in the middle. Then if you are having afro hair, it's also quite good because with afro hair, they don't need to dense pack as much because the curly property, so you actually don't need to waste as many grafts to get fullness because of that. Hair caliber and coverage properties are kind of working in your favor, so you don't need over dense pack. It also has some problems with it, of course. If you have afro hair, during the extraction, there is higher transection rate with afro hair because, as you can see here, the hair is kind of curling also below the skin, beneath the skin. So if they try to take it, sometimes they may transect it more than with straight hair. Now, we talked about the hair type and hair thickness and how they can influence the outcome after the hair transplant. This is going to be skin to hair contrast, which is also another kind of hidden thing that can work either in your favor or against. If you have high skin to hair contrast, as the guy at the top left, you can see he has dark hair and pale skin. That means that the see-through effect will be higher because the skin color doesn't blend with the hair color. It's actually almost the opposite. So it creates the contrast. Now, the opposite we can see with those guys at the bottom. You can see dark skin and dark hair on the guy in the bottom left. And then the guy on the bottom right, you can see also pale skin and, bright pale hair. That's low skin to hair contrast, which plays in your favor. So even with a density that is lower, the blending effect will be better, and the see-through effect will be optically lowered because of that lower skin to hair contrast. But it's something that I would be taking more seriously into consideration once I see a candidate who has, not that strong donor, he's not responding to finasteride, and he wants to get a hair transplant. So these things would need to be considered more seriously in that case and try to optimize for them as perfectly as possible. The indicator number 4 that is also important when trying to achieve the best fullness out of your hair after the transplant is the average number of hairs sprouting from each hair follicle or graft. In order to illustrate the importance of having high hair per graft average in your hair transplant, I'm going to be sharing with you these two examples. So you can see these two gentlemen one with darker hair above and the blonde guy below, they're getting roughly the same number of grafts, 1,531 and 1,600 in the second case. However, if you look at those blue arrows, inside there is a number, 2.46 and 1.4. These are the hair per graft averages, and although those guys are getting roughly the same number of grafts transplanted, they're ending up with a very different amount of hair that will grow after the hair transplant. In the first case, it's going to be 3,766 hairs, and with the blonde guy, it's going to be only 2,240 hairs, which means the guy above is getting 68% more hair growing after the hair transplant, despite getting even slightly less grafts transplanted to begin with. If you are about to get a mega session, this change can be even more pronounced. If you look at the guy on top, he's getting 5,000 grafts, hair per graft ratio 1.5, ending up with 6,500 hairs. The guy below, despite getting even slightly less grafts, 4,847 grafts, but hair per graft ratio 2.4, meaning he's ending up with 11,632 hairs, which is 78% more hair than the guy above him. So as you can see in both examples, having high hair per graft average will translate to having higher volume and higher fullness after your hair transplant. And although this information is very hard to obtain from your donor just by sitting at home or even by me looking at your donor, you can go to a clinic, a dermatology practice, or a hair transplant doctor who uses a trichoscope, dermoscope, or uses TrichoLab softwares and hardwares, and they can do this for you. It takes 20 to 30 minutes. They did it with me after my second hair transplant. These were my results, where you could see the sides and back scanned, and they came up with the values. I see the microns, I see the thickness of my shafts, I see the donor densities, and I see the hair per graft averages nicely here. So it's something that you could do if you have time, if you want to invest into, knowing what how good are you based on this fourth criteria or fourth indicator. If it's really good, then you will be around 2.5. If it's average, you're going to be around 2. And if it's below average, you're going to be below 2 hairs per each graft or each follicle. So that's how I would rank it from poor to average to best. Now, possible problems here is that since those follicles produce 2 hairs, some produce 3 hairs, 4 hairs, many clinics do not really care, and they just keep transplanting one after the other. They don't examine those grafts, and it can create an unnatural pluggy looking hairline and temples, as you can see here, simply because they just see the double and triple as a single, and they just don't differentiate. So guys end up with that pluggy look. So you always got to go to a clinic where they really put a lot of emphasis on separating the singles. So what is ATPN? ATPN is the last indicator or eligibility checker for a hair transplant, if you will. It stands for age, treatments compliance, progression of hair loss in the last 2 years, and Norwood class in the family. And I also prepared for you a little test where you can actually put your values and find out on a scale from 0 to 10 where you stand. The next task will only require 3 minutes to complete, so please take a pencil and a sheet of paper, and I will guide you exactly how to calculate your points to eventually come to your final ATPN score. So age. If you are anywhere from 20 to 25, give yourself 1 point. If it's 30 to 39, it's going to be 2 points, and more than 40, it's going to be 3 points. So the older you get, the more points you get, because then you are actually more eligible for a hair transplant, because the most aggressive hair loss happens in your teens, 20s, and the older you get, the less aggressive the hair loss tends to be on average. Treatment compliance. I'm talking about finasteride compliance. I should rewrite it here, finasteride compliance. So you can see, taking finasteride for a year, you get 1 point. Finasteride for 2+ years, you get 2 points. Progression of hair loss in the last 2 years. And let me explain here. If you were Norwood 3 2 years ago and you are still Norwood 3, that means no. So you get 2 points. Slow means you were Norwood 3 2 years ago, and right now you're like a Norwood 3-ish, maybe some diffuse thinning. Didn't change much, but there is some visible worsening. Then I would say slow. It's 1 point. And if you got from Norwood 3 to Norwood 4, or from Norwood 4 to Norwood 5, that's 0 points. Norwood class in the family. If on average you see a lot of Norwood 1s and 2s in your family, you get 3 points. You get quite a lot of points for this because that's a strong sign that you're probably not going to turn into Norwood 7. A lot of Norwood 3s and 4s, you get 2 points. And if you have Norwood 5s in your family from your mother and father's side, you get 1 point. And if you see some Norwood 6s already, Norwood 7s, that's where you get no points because it means that you could easily turn into one of those. So go ahead and you see how many you get out of 10. 10 is maximum, so 10 will mean you are very suitable, and 0 means you should reconsider or you should work on your finasteride compliance. What are the possible problems of getting a hair transplant despite your ATPN score being very low? It will be usually just, hair transplant at the very young age with high hair loss potential that is going to be mismanaged, or it's not going to be properly detected, and then patients get hairlines that are very low, aggressive, and the rest keeps on thinning. So it comes down to really doing it too early, having bad finasteride compliance. Now also clinics are nowadays accepting young patients with high hair loss potential and they are not taking any treatments, and the clinic really doesn't care oftentimes, and they're like, yeah, we can still do it. And that's unfortunately the reality. Not all of the doctors are like that, but many clinics are like that, and that's the shame. And that's why I'm creating this video as well, to shed some light on it. So the negative consequences as well, you get some short-term hair transplant result and long-term dissatisfaction, plus emotional distress, dealing with the repairs, and so on and so on. All right, guys, so that was it for this video. If you want to support this channel, just hit the like button, man. I will appreciate it. That's enough for me. For sure, if you want to consult your situation with me, I will be happy to help you out one-on-one. There's also a link in the video description below where you can learn more about how I can help you one-on-one with finding the right clinic, discuss the quotes, specific offers you have already received, help you choose the best clinic for your hair type, expectations, and budget, as I have already done with more than 2,000 clients of mine. So thank you so much for watching, and see you in another video. Take care.